There is a version of the Second World War that everyone knows. It is a war of famous machines. The Tiger tank, the Spitfire, the aircraft carrier gliding across the Pacific. These are the weapons the documentaries love, the ones painted onto the covers of the history books. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Not one of them won the war. The weapon that actually won it had no armor. It carried no guns worth mentioning. It was so plain, so graceless, so obviously ugly that the newspapers of the time called it a duckling. It was a cargo ship, and there were so many of them, built so fast and so cheaply, that some of them cracked straight down the middle and sank in calm harbor water before they ever saw an enemy. One of them was built from an empty slipway to a floating ship in 4 days. This is the story of the ugly ship that beat the Tiger, the Spitfire, and every wonder weapon Germany ever dreamed of. And by the end, the verdict is going to be hard to argue with. To understand why a cargo ship decided the outcome of a world war, you have to understand what a world war actually runs on. It does not run on courage. It runs on cargo. Every bullet fired in Normandy, every gallon of fuel burned by a Sherman tank, every ration eaten by a soldier in the Pacific, every crate of ammunition, every spare engine, every boot had to be built in a factory, usually in America, and then carried across an ocean that was full of submarines trying to sink it. In 1940 and 1941, that ocean was being lost. German U-boats were sinking Allied ships faster than the shipyards could replace them. Britain, an island that imported most of its food and nearly all of its fuel, was slowly being strangled. The math was simple and it was terrifying. If ships sank faster than they could be built, the Allies would lose, no matter how brave their soldiers were, no matter how good their tanks looked on paper. Someone had to win a race that had nothing to do with the front line. And the answer came from the most unglamorous place imaginable. The design did not even start in America. It began in Britain with an old, simple, coal-burning tramp steamer, the kind of unremarkable freighter that had been hauling cargo around the world for decades. In 1940, desperate for ships, the British came to American builders with this humble design and a plea to just make more of them. The Americans took that plain British ship and did something no one had done before at this scale. They made it uglier, cheaper, and faster to build than any ocean-going vessel in history. They called it the Liberty ship. The first one was named after Patrick Henry, the man who said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Roosevelt launched a fleet of them on a single day in September 1941 and called the country building them the Arsenal of Democracy. But the ships themselves earned a less flattering name. The press looked at these blunt, slab-sided, functional hulls and called them the Ugly Ducklings. And the man who would build more of them than anyone had never built a ship in his life. His name was Henry Kaiser. He was a construction magnate. He built roads and dams, including part of the Hoover Dam. He knew nothing about shipbuilding, and it turned out that not knowing was his greatest advantage. Kaiser did not build ships the way ships had always been built, slowly, riveted plate by master craftsmen. He built them the way Henry Ford built cars. He broke the ship into sections, prefabricated those sections inland, trucked them to the yard, and welded them together instead of riveting them. Welding was faster, cheaper, and needed far less skill, which mattered enormously because the skilled men were gone. They were in uniform. So Kaiser hired the people everyone else ignored: housewives, farm workers, people who had never held a welding torch. Women poured into the shipyards in the tens of thousands, and Rosie the Riveter got a sister on the coast, the welder they nicknamed Wendy. And the ships came, slowly at first, taking around 230 days to build one, then faster. then faster still, until the average dropped to around 40 days. And then in November 1942, at a yard in Richmond, California, Kaiser's workers decided to prove a point. They laid the keel of a ship called the Robert E. Peary, and they raced. 4 days, 15 hours, and about 30 minutes later, that ship slid into the water. A complete ocean-going cargo vessel, built in less time than it takes some people to assemble a bookshelf. The workers had rehearsed it like a pit crew, every plate and every weld staged and ready. It was a publicity stunt, and everyone knew it. But the message it sent to Berlin was deadly serious. Because this was the German plan, and it was a good one. Germany could not invade America. It could not outproduce America. So the German Navy tried to do the next best thing: strangle the supply line, sink the ships. The commanders of the U-boat fleet understood that this was, above all, a numbers war, a war of tonnage. If their submarines could sink more tons of shipping every month than the Allies could build, Britain would starve, and the invasion of Europe would never come. For a while, it worked horrifyingly well. In the first half of 1942, U-boats were sinking Allied ships at a catastrophic rate, sometimes within sight of the American coast, where the glow of city lights silhouetted the tankers perfectly. American cities had been slow to order blackouts, and for months, the submarine crews called it their second happy time, picking off ships so close to shore that people on the beach could sometimes see the fires burning on the horizon. The Allies were bleeding ships faster than any shipyard on Earth could replace them. This was the real battle, and the Allies were losing it. And then the arithmetic flipped. By 1943, Kaiser and the other American yards were launching Liberty ships faster than the U-boats could sink them. At the peak, the American shipyards together were turning out roughly 3 ships every single day. It no longer mattered how many the submarines destroyed. For every one that went down, more rolled off the slipways. The German Navy could win battles at sea and still lose the war, because they were fighting an enemy that could replace its losses faster than they could inflict them. The U-boat, the weapon that had nearly won the Atlantic, was drowned in a flood of ugly, mass-produced cargo ships. But there was a price for building anything that fast, and it very nearly became a catastrophe of its own. Because some of these ships were not just ugly, they were dangerous. The welding that made them so fast to build had a hidden flaw that no one fully understood at the time. In cold water, the steel and the welded seams could turn brittle, and a small crack could suddenly race across the entire hull in an instant. In January 1943, a brand new Liberty ship called the Schenectady was sitting quietly at a dock in calm water when it split almost in two with a bang heard across the harbor. It had never even been to sea. It is reported that around 1 in 3 Liberty ships developed cracks of some kind, and a smaller number broke apart completely, some of them snapping in half in the open ocean and taking their crews down with them. For a terrifying moment, it looked as though the war-winning ship might be a death trap. Engineers scrambled to understand what was happening and what they learned from those broken hulls, about how metal fails in the cold, changed the science of shipbuilding forever. They reinforced the ships, they improved the steel and the welds, and the fractures slowed. The ugly duckling had nearly torn itself apart, but it held together just long enough to do the one thing it was built for. What it was built for was everything. When the Allies landed at Normandy in June 1944, the men who fought their way off the beaches were kept alive by an endless river of supplies. And Liberty ships were the barges of that river, hauling the tanks, the trucks, the fuel, and the ammunition that turned a beachhead into a breakout. In the Pacific, they carried entire armies from island to island across the largest ocean on Earth. And on the most dangerous run of all, The Arctic convoys to the Soviet Union, they carried the trucks, the boots, the food, and the raw materials that helped keep the Red Army moving toward Berlin. By the end of the war, these ships had carried far more than a supply line. They had carried the physical weight of victory itself, tens of millions of tons of it, across every ocean on the planet. The Tiger tank that gets all the glory-needed fuel to move and shells to fire, and both had very often crossed an ocean in the belly of a ship like this. Take away the cargo, and the wonder weapon is a very expensive statue. But someone had to sail these ships, and this is the part of the story that history almost erased. The Liberty ships were crewed by the merchant marine, civilian sailors, many of them too old or too young for the regular military. They were not soldiers. They carried the guns and the fuel, which meant that when a torpedo found them, they did not just sink. They exploded, or they burned, or they froze in a lifeboat in the Arctic. By some accounts, the merchant marines suffered a higher rate of death than any of the American armed services, losing something close to 1 man in every 26. They sailed lightly armed ships through wolf packs so that soldiers on the other side of the world would have something to fight with. And when the war ended, they were sent home and told, in effect, that they had not really served. It took more than 40 years, until 1988, for the United States to finally recognize those merchant mariners as veterans. And by then, a great many of them were already gone. So here is the verdict. The Second World War was not won by the beautiful machines. It was won by the ugly one. It was won in the shipyards of Richmond and Portland and Baltimore by women with welding torches and men who had never built a ship, turning out a vessel every few hours until the enemy simply could not keep up. The Tiger was a masterpiece that Germany could only build in the hundreds. The Liberty ship was a plain, cracked, unglamorous box that America built more than 2,700 times. And in a war of tonnage, the box won. That is the quiet lesson underneath every war. Battles are won by courage, but wars are won by capacity, by the unglamorous ability to make more, faster, than the other side can destroy. The machines we put on posters are the ones that look dangerous. The machine that actually decided the outcome looked like a floating warehouse, and it has been almost completely forgotten. So the next time you see a documentary celebrating some sleek and terrible war machine, remember the ugly duckling that carried it. Now, we know some of you are going to disagree, and we want to hear it. If you think one specific machine did more to win the war than the ships that carried it, make your case in the comments because we read them. If this changed the way you see the war, hit subscribe because Iron Verdict puts a different machine on trial every week. The verdict is in. The ugliest ship of the war was the one that won it.